And so this gets me to this dichotomy that we often encounter and that I know you're passionate to address in the book. This is one of the burdens of the volume in a way. It seems to me anyway, as a reader, that this dichotomy that we often hear between head knowledge and heart knowledge.
Right.
And you want to obliterate that, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think to bring us back to how Scripture would have us see it. And I think when a friend is speaking to us in those terms, we understand what they're trying to get at, and I think we need to be gracious listeners at that point. But ultimately, technically, that's not a good distinction to make between the head and the heart, because the heart, I think this is especially true in the Old Testament. It is more often than not, in the Old Testament, the word lev, levav, are Hebrew words for heart, refer to the cognitive element of who we are. You see that coming out especially in the wisdom literature, which is the highest per capita appearances of the word heart, over 200 times in the wisdom literature. So that's telling us something. So like when you're reading the book of Proverbs and it says, this fool, he lacks sense or lacks understanding, as some of the modern translations put it, if you were to look at the Hebrew, the phrase is he lacks heart. And it helps to make the point. I was reading the other day in B.B. Warfield where he talked about the Reformation. It makes a distinction between the material principle and the formal principle. And in parentheses it says, and of course the heart, that cognitive faculty of man. And it's because B.B. Warfield understood biblical literature.
So that heart in Scripture is a comprehensive term.
Yes.
It doesn't merely signify our affections. It also signifies our understanding or our intellect, and it can signify more than that.
Right.
So our translations don't always carry over the idea or don't signal to us, hey, the phrase at work here is heart.
Right.
But because of the way it gets translated, that might enable the reader to make distinctions that really aren't present in Scripture.
Right. And in modern-day translations, sometimes what you're reading in your English version, it will say the mind, when literally it's heart. But the context, it's so obvious, it's so clear that the author is trying to highlight what I know, my understanding or my reflection or my meditation, that an English translation will go with mind. And so you can sympathize with the translator, because if he or she puts heart there, then we're going to say, well, wait a second, but the heart has to do with feelings. Well, it does, but as you just said, it's more than that. And I think, one of the most important things to understand is that Scripture helps us to appreciate, like in Romans 1, other places, that our thinking always has an agenda. Our thoughts are on an errand. There's a trajectory, or we're tacking in a certain direction because we have these motives. And it shows how our thinking is very much influenced by our desires and our will. And so in the New Testament, you get this language where, for instance, when Christ is speaking to Peter, and Peter is saying, no, you shouldn't go to Jerusalem and suffer. And Christ says, get behind me, Satan. He says, you have set your mind not on the things of God, but the things of man. And what he's saying there, that phroneo, that Greek term, means this path that you're going down. And it's rare that we have these disparate, unattached thoughts. Usually they line up, heading in a direction. Well, what's influencing that? Well, it's our heart. It's because all these things are wrapped up together. Our mind, our affections, and our will, it's all together. And so there's always this agenda at work in my thinking. It's not some sort of like pure, objective, coming out of an antiseptic laboratory, like where they make, microchips. It's not like that. And that's why it's so important to appreciate why it is that the cognitive element of who we are is included in the heart and why it's part of this overall complex package that God made for us.